thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. And thank you very much for spending your afternoon, Sunday afternoon, the sunny afternoon. Finally, we've got the sun. And I didn't introduce myself. I should have said that I am David, and I was born also in Armenia, in Hrazdan. So I'm from there. So when I moved to the UK back in 2010, I started working with Professor Theo van Lint, first on my classical Armenian, and then a year later on my doctoral dissertation. And the topic of the dissertation was the representation of women in the 5th century Armenian texts. Why 5th century? So many of you, of course, know that conventionally it is known as the golden age of Armenian literature. It's called golden. Actually, it's the first age of Armenian, written Armenian tradition, and this is where we start with the first text actually written in the Armenian script. And I thought, if you want to learn about the history of women in the Armenian tradition, you need to start from the very beginning. So I embarked on that journey 3.5 years, and eventually I defended my dissertation, and then I turned it into a book which came out last year. And you will see a few images that I will show, and this is the cover of the book, a picture that I like very much. But as far as today's talk is concerned, I was made to think about the role of women in the 5th century and how I can link that research to 21st century. There was this talk in a conference in 2019 at Harvard University, and I was invited to speak about my research and see how my research on the 5th century can be connected to the 21st century. Is there any connection, anything that research could help us understand what was happening in Armenia and in diaspora today? And this is where I started thinking about the role of women in general in the Armenian church, and how this role was originally perceived, and then how these things changed. Today I will speak first about the Christianization narratives. So from the 5th century, as soon as we have the written language, the script invented by Mesrop Mashtots in approximately 405, the Armenian church started producing a lot of text. And the main idea was we need a written text, we need written books, written word to be able to spread Christianity. Because otherwise people don't understand what Christianity is. There was no Bible in Armenian. The Bible was in Greek or Syriac, and the vast majority of the population didn't understand. So that's why it's important to start with the Christianization narratives from the 5th century. Then I will speak a little bit more about that century, because this is quite a remarkable council of ŠAHAPIVAN in 444, which produced 20 canons. They were promoted by the church, and you will see how important that is for the role of women in the Armenian society. Then I will cover the Middle Ages. I will be very brief about that, because I think the most important is how all of this affect women in today's society, in the 21st century. So I'll try to draw some parallels, and hopefully at the end of this you will have many questions. So I will start with this text. Don't worry if you can't see it, I will go over all these details. But this is the first text, which was written approximately in 460s by someone who calls himself Agathangeros. So it's a Greek name which means the bearer of good tidings, Agathangeros, and we don't know actually who he was. He claims that he was the secretary of the Armenian king Tartat, who became Christian in the 4th century. The problem is that in the 4th century we didn't have a script, so he couldn't be. I mean, he claims, but most likely it's a kind of oral tradition, stories that were told in the church. So we definitely know that the text that we have was originally written in Armenia, and the textual evidence speaks about 460s approximately. Now this text is perhaps the most important one for the church, because it tells us the story how Armenians became Christian. That's kind of the most important text, and this is what usually is taught in schools, and this is something that you will hear very often. So the story starts in 224 with the description of the Sasanian Empire, the establishment of the Sasanian Empire, because Armenians and the Sasanian Iran were they were neighbors, and of course what happened in Iran affected directly what happened in Armenia. Before that, the Armenian kings were the close relatives of the Persian Shahs in the Parthian Empire. And when the things changed, some sort of revolution that happened in 224, the Armenians here did not accept that. And there was a clash between the Armenian kingdom, the Arsacid Armenian kingdom, the Arshakunis, and the Sasanians. So the story starts from that point. Then we hear that Armenian king Khosrov tries to revenge his brethren in Iran, because the Shah of Iran at the time was some sort of very close cousin of the Armenian king. And because he was killed, the Armenian king tries to revenge it, but instead of that, he's killed himself. And he's killed by someone called Anak, a Persian. So we know the name. But the interesting thing is that Anak is the father of Saint Gregory the Illuminator, the person who converted Armenia to Christianity. So we hear this story that the Armenians who saw that their king is murdered, they chase after Anak, they find him, they kill him, they try to kill his family, but his son Gregory, who was very young at the time, is taken to Caesarea, to the Greek territory, where he is safe, and this is where he becomes Christian. And he decides to come back to Armenia and try to evangelize Armenians, to try to spread the Christian teaching there. So Gregory comes to the court of King Tartat at the time. So Tartat was the son of Khosrov, who was murdered. But Tartat doesn't know who Gregory is. So he serves there, and he tries to kind of repay the sin of his father who killed the king's father. Then there is this ceremony that is happening, a Zoroastrian ceremony, and it's important to understand. Armenians were Zoroastrians before Christianity. It's one of the most ancient religions. Until today it exists, and there are quite a few people both in the UK, but mostly they live in India at the moment. Several million people around the world. So the Armenians, being Zoroastrian, the Armenian king was Zoroastrian, so they perform a Zoroastrian ceremony, and they have to sacrifice to the goddesses and the gods of Zoroastrian pantheon. And I'm sure most of you have seen the mask of Anahit in the British Museum. So that was the goddess that was very much beloved by the Armenians at the time. So Tartat kind of asks Gregory to sacrifice to that goddess. And Gregory refuses. He says, well, I'm Christian and I'm not going to do that. This is not that's a false goddess. So I'm not going to do that. And then someone tells the king that actually Gregory is also the son of the person who killed your father. So Tartat decides to punish him. And to punish him, he throws Gregory into what is nowadays known as Khorvirab. It's a place in Ararat Valley. So it's a hole, basically, where he was thrown to die. And according to Agathangelos, there were snakes and scorpions and so on. And for 13 years, he stays there. Now we come to this red part. I highlighted it in red because this is the part where the first actual women appear in this text. And the first one is that there was a widow who lived nearby that prison where Gregory was. So, and she every day she bakes fresh bread and throws a loaf of bread to save Gregory because she wanted to help him. And this is how Gregory survives for 13 years in that pit. Now, if you go to Armenia, there is a beautiful church there. At the background, there's Mount Ararat, so it's a fantastic and a very interesting place. You can actually go down into that deep and see the place where, according to this story, Saint Gregory was imprisoned. Then the story moves on, takes us to different parts of the world. We appear in Rome. in the suburbs of Rome, where there is this young nun whose name is Hripsime. And she's very beautiful. She's described as being from a royal family. She's really very beautiful, but she's very pious, and she lives with other nuns in that monastery. And the Roman Emperor Diocletian decides to marry, and he sends people around to find an appropriate bride for him. So they come to the monastery, see Hripsime, they paint her image on something, send it to the king, and the king falls in love by seeing that picture. So he says, okay, the wedding is tomorrow, bring her, I want to marry her. Eventually, when Hripsime hears this story, what's going to happen to her, she decides to run away. And according to Agathangelos, she comes to Armenia, because she thinks that that would be the place where she will be safe. But the Armenian king Tartat and Diocletian, according to Agathangelos, were very good friends, and Diocletian learns that Hripsime is hiding from him in Armenia. Here the narrative goes in a very weird way. Diocletian says, okay, I don't need her anymore, but if you like her, you can marry her. And Tartat decides, yeah, she's very beautiful, I'm going to marry her. But in fact, he was married already. And this is an evidence that the Armenians, being Zoroastrians, they could have several wives at the time. So, of course, Hripsime rejects it. She says, my religion, my faith, my God doesn't allow this. She fights the king, and even there is a description of physical fight where Hripsime physically defeats this very strong king, runs away. Eventually she is caught, and she and her friends who fled with her from Rome, they are all martyred. And all of a sudden the Armenians plunge into darkness, according to Agathangelos, because they killed saint people. So the king becomes a wild boar, everyone gets mad, and then the sister of the king, Khosroviduht, sees this vision that only one person can save the king and the country, and it's Gregory, who is in the deep pit. No one believes that after 13 years he will be alive, but they go find Gregory, they bring him out, and Gregory comes and he says, well, you have to repent, I'm going to baptize you. The moment you become Christian and you repent, you will be saved, you will again regain your human face. And this is what happens. And then according to the story, with the help, I have highlighted here again in red, so king's wife and sisters and everyone else participate in converting the entire Armenian population. And according to Agathangelos, the Armenians immediately became Christian. And this is all in 4th century. It's the beginning of the 4th century, according to Agathangelos. Of course, later on we learned that it didn't happen like that very quickly. It took several centuries for Armenians actually to become, as a whole nation, Christian. But that's what Agathangelos wants us to believe. And here you could see the image of King Tartat, and Queen Ashken and Tartat's sister Khosroviduht. This is a mural in the Echmiadzin Cathedral by Narashov Natan. It's approximately beginning of the 18th century. So they kind of, according to Agathangelos, they symbolize Armenia's Christianity, plus of course Saint Gregory the Illuminator. But we'll come to this later. Now what I did is I looked at how these women are presented in this text, because it is important. The church was teaching this, starting from the 5th century until today, that this is how the story of Christianization happened. And one of the things that you will see here is, this is St. Hripsime Church, and in Echmiadzin. So she's buried there. There is a tomb with her image on it. So on those places where Hripsime and other virgins were murdered, churches had been built, and first martyrium and then churches. And so what I did is I read very closely this text by Agathangelos to try and understand how the Armenian church depicted women, whether they were described as having some power, having some agency, doing something. And the first word that I found is the word luminaries, lusavork in Armenian. At first I kind of dismissed it, but then when I started searching the theological aspect of it, this is a word that was used very often for the apostles Christ's apostles. So it's a very important word, and it's not random that Agathangelos chose this particular word to describe these women, because if we think technically, because they were killed, that's why Armenia became Christian. Without them, Christianity wouldn't be accepted in Armenia. Later on in the text, Saint Gregory himself calls them apostles of yours. Again, it's a very important title. We know that there are 12 apostles of Christ, but Saint Gregory, who is considered to be the founder of Armenian Christianity, himself calls them apostles of yours. So he tries to raise the function of Hripsime and her companions who died but kept their faith. Then there is another interesting thing in that text. So we have even the Virgin Mary. And this is something we will come back again later. So according to Roman and Greek church fathers, because of Eve, all women had to suffer. It was because she was the one who succumbed to the snake and so on. And this was the story that was told again and again, starting from the beginning of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. And there were some church fathers who were saying, actually, yes, Eve did wrong, but the Virgin Mary kind of helped to fix the situation. So there were two stories, two narratives going on about this. So some were saying, yeah, women should be secondary because of Eve. Others were saying, no, actually, because of the Virgin Mary, they are also great, and they can. The Virgin Mary cleansed the sins, and everything should be equal. And when we look at Agathangelos' story, he takes up this second narrative. He says, actually, yes, the Virgin Mary managed to do that. So we need to follow what is written in the New Testament. Then, in the same text, St. Gregory actually accuses Adam rather than Eve. Says, well, Adam had a free will. He could have said, no, I don't want this apple, I'm not going to accept it. But he didn't. So we can't blame only Eve for the fall that now we are not in the paradise. But Adam is to blame as well. And then there is this very important word. I repeat, these are the words of Saint Gregory the Illuminator, who says, women too were blessed on account of the virgin birth, which was from amongst them. And I took that the first part of this phrase, women too were blessed, that's the title of my book, because I think it summarizes very well how the Armenian Church in the 5th century saw the role of women. Now, there is also there are other passages where Saint Gregory speaks about Hripsime and her friends. He calls them strong fortress, mighty power, protectors by intercession. He clearly states that if it weren't for them, if these women didn't spill their blood on the Armenian land, you would never have been saved. It's only through these women that Armenians first became Christian, and second, they can be saved. And through these women's blood, Armenians can be saved and become God's people. So there was this tendency of the church to present Armenians as chosen people after the sacrifice that these virgins made. So if we look at this image, this is from Crimea, from Yalta. There is this church of Saint Hripsime. And this is a very recent mosaic, but I think it very nicely describes the attitude of Agathangelos. So you could see here, this is Hripsime with a cross in her hand, and she's standing on Tartat, on King Tartat. This is a symbol of Hripsime's Christianity defeating Tartat's Zoroastrianism. So this is kind of the symbol according to Agathangelos. And this is something that I want to stress again and again. If we come to the 21st century, many of you who've been to Armenia, to Echmiadzin, to the Holy Mother of See of the Armenian Church, you might have seen this. This is the gate of St. Gregory. And when I was there in 2019, I was a bit surprised that you could see only two male figures here. So you could see St. Gregory, and you could see King Tartat on the left. And they are as if Gregory is passing the cross to Tartat. Yes, this is what, according to Agathangelos, happened, but I thought it would be important to also involve the sacrifice that Ripsime and her companions did, because Agathangelos himself says that without them this wouldn't happen. But it's not that. So this is the imagery. Again, I want you to keep this in mind. This is the imagery that you find also in many other places. Recently, I saw this in Glendale's Armenian Church again, a similar image. It's just Gregory and Tartat. No Ripsime, no women on it. There is another story as well of Armenia's Christianization through Saint Bartholomew. It's a different strand of Armenian Christianity. It came from the Syriac tradition. But again, the idea is the same. There is this girl, Sanducht, who is the daughter of the king, and she follows Saint Bartholomew. She believes in Christianity, and she starts to teach Christianity to everyone in Armenia. And as a result, she is killed by her own father because she said, I'm not going to renounce my Christianity. And even if you read that story, again, you see a very powerful female figure who is bringing Christianity, who is helping to spread Christianity in Armenia by sacrificing herself. Unfortunately, it's always women sacrificing, and men are kind of standing there and watching it. But again, Sanducht was the one who sacrificed herself to bring Christianity, and Armenians converted in thousands after that. Now, I mentioned the ŠAHAPIVAN Council. So the Council of the Church, until today, is a very interesting phenomenon. I don't think you find it in other places as well. So when you have this big council, it means important decisions are made at the time. And according to this tradition, in the Armenian Church, also very simple, common people can join, participate, express their point of view. The concept is really very democratic. So it's not that the church only decides who's going to do what, but there is also the input from the princes, and there is also input from common people. And now at this council in 444, the Armenian Church adopted 20 canons, basically 20 laws that were supposed to be part of the Armenian legislation. And if you read those in which women are mentioned, you would notice one very interesting thing. Women and men are treated the same. So according to the church leaders and the general population, men and women should be punished equally in the same way for the same crime. If you compare at the same time what was happening, for example, in the Roman Empire, women were punished 10 times more severely than men for the same crime. So all of a sudden you try to think, why was this happening? But this is what the church was doing. So the why I tried to answer in the book, where I tried to explain that it was the Zoroastrian mentality. But it's a topic for another talk. But for example, look at Canon 2. If the daughter of a priest is found in fornication, let her have no share in the church, and let her be removed from the priest's house. Let severe penance and penalty be imposed on her, and the same penalty will apply to the son of the priest. So, the same punishment. If you look at the next canon, regarding those who do charms but do not practice sorcery, if men or women are found doing charms, let them be flogged 15 times, branded, covered in ashes, and have their bones crushed. Very severe, of course, but the key here is, again, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. If you are committing this crime, you will be punished in the same way. Another important point, which is taken from New Testament, from 1 Corinthians 7.4. The husband does not rule over his body, but the wife does. Likewise, the wife does not rule over her body, but the husband. This is inserted in these canons. And this is what clearly shows how, in the 5th century, the Armenian Church perceived the roles of men and women in society. So there was this understanding that it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. If you are Christian and if you follow the teachings of the church, this is how you will live. You will be considered to be blessed and righteous and so on. If you commit a crime, you will be punished in the same way. So this is a quote, a direct quote, as I said, from the New Testament, included in this as part of the canon, canon number 3. Now, I want to draw your attention to 2 other passages. And these are also important. This is the contradiction that we have in the Bible. Well, some people would say it's not a contradiction. It depends on how we read this. But again, in the same New Testament, we find these 2 statements. One says women should be silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, and so on. And at the end, for it is shameful for a woman to speak in the church. And the second one is, let a woman learn in silence with full submission. I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She is to keep silent. These words are ascribed to Saint Paul. So you could see, this is something that exists in the Bible, in the New Testament, and the other quote is also present there. Now, many people worked on this, trying to explain why is it so. The importance for this talk is, and I will highlight it at the end, that we have a choice, depending on what we want to focus on. If we want to focus on the fact that they are equal, we can do this. If we want to focus on this, then we will have a misogynistic society, which was throughout centuries, and the patriarchal values will continue to dominate. Now, I'll fast forward to the Middle Ages, and this is the Sanahin Monastery, 10th century. This is one example of how women contributed to the spread of Christianity in Armenia, to how women participated in building churches, in funding manuscripts, and doing everything to strengthen the church institutions in different parts of Armenia, even in diaspora later on, when we have already from the 13th, 14th century, or in Cilician Armenia, women were very, very active contributing to it. And this is a very good example. So for example, I just focused on this one because it's a very beautiful monastery. So according to one colophon, it's a text inserted at the end of the manuscript where the scribe, the person who was copying the manuscript, explains the circumstances, how this manuscript was created. So the scribe, whose name is Simeon, says that I, an unworthy one from amongst the monks, a despicable scribe, this is a typical thing, they have to belittle themselves, copied this manuscript in the year 421. This is based on the Armenian calendar, which corresponds to 972 of the Armenian era, in this newly built monastery called Sanahin, which the pious queen Khosrovanush, the wife of Ashot Shahanshah of Armenia, son of Sambat Bagratuni, king of Armenia, built. So this is one of many churches that women actually built, and in most cases they built with their own money. It was important. If it was shared, if the expenses were shared, always the name of the other person would be mentioned. And women indeed have some money. Usually it would come from their own families when they got married. They could keep some money and they could donate it. It was their property. So the husbands didn't have anything, any power over this money. And they would generously fund churches, monasteries, and, as I said, manuscripts and many, many other things like roads and bridges. We even have some bridges where there is an inscription saying that this was funded by a certain woman because it was an important road, so she funded the bridge. Also in the Middle Ages, we find a very interesting phenomenon. This is, of course, most likely happened before as well, that and they participated in liturgy, they helped the priest, so the role of the Deaconesses is very important. And this is a book written by Father Abel Aberian Orlugan, and there is a lot written about how women helped the priests, especially when the things were going in a wrong direction, when there were not enough people who would come and join the liturgy, who would help with different ceremonies. Women were actively involved in it. Interestingly, the Armenian Church, and I guess I haven't seen this in other churches, but in the Armenian Church we have this book called Mashtots, which is a description of different ceremonies and how the ceremonies in the church should be performed. And one of the first copies of that we have, it comes from the 9th century, late 9th century. And there is a passage which clearly says that there is a procedure how women can be ordained in the church and become deaconesses. It doesn't say about priests, but it says about deaconesses. So women have the right to do that. And there is this description that says men should do this, and women should do exactly the same thing, but they need to put something on there for it. So there is just a technicality added. But the concept is that the Armenian Church already in the 10th century has this text saying that there is a ceremony for women to become ordained as deaconesses and participate in various ceremonies. Now, if we fast forward again to the 21st century, this is a picture from Iran, and this shows a 24-year-old Ani Kristi Manvelyan, who is an anesthesiologist by profession, and she was ordained there along with another person, and she was ordained by the Archbishop Sebuh Sargsyan, the primate of the prelacy of Tehran. So we have it, and we have it also, we had it in Constantinople during the Ottoman period, we had it later as well. So we could see that it's not something very weird, although some people try to present it that, okay, this is kind of weird in the Armenian Church. It is not. So there is precedent, and there is also the liturgical explanation for this. Now, this is how Sebuh Sargsyan explained why she was ordained. He says, "What I have done is in conformity with the tradition of the church and nothing else." So he refers directly to that Mashtots, the book that described the ceremony. Today our church is confronting the imperative of self-examination and self-critique. It is imperative to rejuvenate the participation of the people in the social, educational, and service spheres of the church. It is our deep conviction that the active participation of women in the life of our church would allow Armenian women to be involved more enthusiastically and vigorously, and would allow them to be connected and engaged. So this is, these are the words of the Archbishop, where he tried to explain in the Armenian Weekly why he did this. And you could see the date is, it happened in 2018, so very recently. Now, again, this is kind of a unique phenomenon for the time being. We don't see it happening everywhere. So this happened in Tehran. In 2014, you could see these organizations at the top. They tried to run a survey in Armenia. And the survey's idea was how women are, the role of women in society is perceived by the church. And some very interesting results came out of this. So I just took the parts which are very interesting. So you could see the Armenian text there, and this is the English translation. So, according to this report, to substantiate their view, the Armenian Apostolic Church quotes the following passages from the New Testament, and that's the one that I mentioned before. So, according to them, as in all the churches of God, let women be silent in church, for they are not permitted to speak, but they should be obedient, as the law also says. So this is a reference to, again, 1 Corinthians 14:34 and 1 Timothy 2:11 and 12. And this is according to the attitudes of Armenian priests in Armenia in 2014. So this is a survey, of course. So I tried to dig a little bit more and try to see what we can find on the website, on the church's website. So this is a wonderful portal. It's called, I'm trying to remember, Surb Zoravor Church. So there is this church in Yerevan. And this website has a lot of very interesting material about the history of Armenian Church. You can download books and so on. And there are also some talks and explanations of biblical passages. So it's very useful overall. But the bit that I was interested in to try and find what this website says about women and the church. And so this is the article which is entitled Kine Yev Yekeretsin, so the woman and the church. And I just took one passage from there. So this is the Armenian one. I will just show you the translation of it. So the question, it's written in the format of as if someone asks a priest the question and the priest answers, provides the explanation. So the question is this: wouldn't be it right if the church also emphasized and confirmed the equality between men and women? So, 21st century question, I guess, which had to be asked, unfortunately, but we still have that problem. The answer really puzzles me very much, because the priest answers. One of the prominent clerics of the Russian Orthodox Church, the priest Alexander Shmeman, who is famous for his theological and ecclesiastical works, says that comparison, which lies at the basis of equality, is a source of evil. It leads to a rebellion and division. It is the origin of Satan. Equality is established as a uselessness of distinction. To the demonic principle of comparison, Christianity opposes love, the essence of which lies in the absence of equality. It's really very puzzling for me. First, why would an Armenian priest quote, for example, Alexander Shmeman, who is the representative of the Russian Orthodox Church, and not, for example, Saint Gregory the Illuminator, the founder of the Armenian Church, who said, as I showed you, women too were blessed because of the Virgin Mary. So this is something that really puzzled me. And I think this is where the problem lies. The problem lies in the choices, what we want to choose. Look what I found on Twitter of the Armenian Catholicos of Cilicia. Aram Catholicos. This is what he tweeted in 2019 on March the 8th, on the International Women's Day. And he says, equality between man and woman is one of the fundamental principles of Christianity. It is true that men and women are biologically different. However, they should have the same rights, obligations, opportunities, and responsibilities. So, what we see here, and I hope I managed to show this, that we have a very long history of Christianity in Armenia. And we had church fathers who wrote both about the equality of men and women and about women being secondary. So we have the choice in the 21st century to build our understanding of how the society and the church should interact. And I think in the 21st century, we need to make the right choices. I mean, the world has slightly changed from what it was 2,000 years ago, when St. Paul was discriminating against women in some of his epistles, and saying that it's kind of, they are equal in other. And I want to finish with this quote from Harry Potter. But I think it summarizes what I wanted to say today. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. It is our choice whether we want to treat in society the role of women in the church and the role of women in society as equal. And I think it is for me sometimes puzzling that still in the 21st century we have to argue about equal rights for every human being, but we still do that, unfortunately. And I think the church has a very important role to play, especially because it is still a very respected organization, both in diaspora and in the Republic of Armenia. I think the church has both the responsibility, the power, at the same time, to promote these ideas that in the 21st century we shouldn't be discriminating someone on the basis of their gender, and I'm not talking about other things. So thank you very much. I hope you have questions now. So yeah.